The world often judges a man by the edifice he leaves behind, but sometimes the greatest structures are those built entirely of regret. And for Elias Thorne, the towering monument to his failure was the Golden Sunset Retirement Home, a place ironically named considering it was where life came not to shine, but merely to dim. Elias, at 82, was a ghost haunting the halls of his own obsolescence, meticulously cared for by staff who saw him not as a man, but as a liability with a pulse. He had been an architect of renown, a visionary whose blueprints reshaped skylines, yet he could not design a simple, stable life for his own blood. The greatest casualty of his ambition had been his grandson, Leo. A rift, cold and deep as an Arctic trench, had separated them for years, fueled by old money squabbles, misunderstandings, and the brittle pride that often afflicts men who believe their legacy is their only worth. Now, sitting in his meticulously organized room, room 307, the sterile white walls pressing in like the pages of a closed book, Elias knew the time for pride was over. The catalyst arrived not through a dramatic revelation, but through the mundane, brutal efficiency of the modern world. It was a Tuesday evening, the air thick with the scent of boiled carrots and disinfectant. Elias, feigning sleep, had positioned his ancient hearing aid, a bulky beige device he usually despised, near the slightly ajar door. Nurse Mildred, a woman whose heart was as robust as her rubber-soled shoes, was taking a personal call in the hallway, believing the late hour granted her privacy. The details that filtered through the static were fragmented, yet horrifyingly clear. The eviction notice, sleeping in the park, the Iron District, Leo Thorne is failing. The words struck Elias not as a surprise, but as the final, agonizing confirmation of his worst fears. Leo, his bright, fiercely independent grandson, reduced to street life in the grimy, neglected industrial sector of the city. Elias's hands, gnarled and spotted with age, began to tremble, not from weakness, but from a sudden, terrifying surge of purpose. He was trapped in a gilded cage while the only remnant of his family suffered. The very notion was an insult to the memory of the life he had wasted. In that instant, room 307 transformed from a retirement chamber into a war room. Elias Thorne, the architect of steel and glass, began designing his final, most personal blueprint, an escape plan. It had to be flawless, executed with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. The staff at Golden Sunset prided themselves on their security protocols, a system designed less for safety and more for the prevention of lawsuits and embarrassing media coverage. They monitored every entrance, every exit, every wandering mind. But they underestimated Elias Thorne. They saw a frail old man. Elias saw structural weakness and predictable human behavior. His greatest advantage was routine. Nurse Mildred's rounds were precisely at 10:15 p.m. and 1:30 a.m. Security Chief Jensen, a man whose ambition vastly outweighed his intellect, always took his mandatory 20-minute unauthorized cigarette break behind the industrial bins at 12:45 a.m., a habit Elias had observed and logged for months. The preparation was slow, agonizing work, constrained by the limits of his 82-year-old body. His walker, a hated symbol of his decline, became his instrument of liberation. Over 3 days, using a straightened paperclip and a piece of emery board pilfered from the communal craft basket, he meticulously loosened the screws on the rubber stopper of his walker's front wheel. Inside the hollowed-out tube, he concealed his tools, a small, sturdy piece of thin wire stolen from an unused oxygen machine, and a miniature map of the city, painstakingly drawn from memory onto the back of an old laundry ticket. The night of the escape arrived veiled in a thick, suffocating fog, a perfect accomplice. Elias waited until the clock on his bedside table glowed 12:40 a.m. The silence of the institution at this hour was profound, broken only by the rhythmic, mechanical wheeze of the ventilation system. He felt a terrifying mixture of adrenaline and dread, the kind of feeling he hadn't experienced since presenting his first skyscraper proposal to a skeptical board decades ago. He rose slowly, the joints in his knees screaming a protest that he ruthlessly ignored. He donned his darkest, thickest coat, the one he had insisted on keeping despite the nurse's attempts to swap it for a more cheerful institutional cardigan. In his pocket, a single photograph, a faded image of Leo at age 10, missing a front tooth, beaming with a joy that now felt like a cruel fantasy. The corridor was deserted. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator conserving energy, his walker clicking softly on the linoleum floor. The main obstacle was the fire exit door on the ground floor, locked with a magnetic strip and a keypad. Elias knew the code was changed weekly, but he also knew the weakness of the system, the janitorial staff. 2 weeks prior, during a brief, forced interaction with a young, exhausted janitor named Marco, Elias had mentioned that the numbers 1 and 7 on the keypad felt sticky. Marco, distracted and overworked, had confirmed the full code, the institutional anniversary date 0717, followed by the current year, 22. But the sticky buttons meant wear and tear. The real weakness was the residue. He reached the door, his breath shallow. The faint smell of stale cigarettes wafted from the vicinity of the industrial bins, confirming Jensen's punctuality. Elias held his breath and shone the tiny beam from a modified keychain light, a promotional item from his architectural firm, across the keypad. Just as he hoped, the faintest trace of oil and skin cells clung to 4 specific buttons, 0, 7, 1, 7. The janitor had been wrong about the year sequence. They only used the anniversary date. With trembling fingers, he entered the 4 digits. A soft, satisfying thunk echoed in the stillness. The green light flashed. He was through. The cold hit him immediately, sharp and unforgiving, pulling the heat from his bones. He was outside, standing on the damp, manicured lawn of Golden Sunset. The fog was so dense, it swallowed the distant streetlights, turning the world into a gray, featureless void. He pushed the walker across the grass, the wheels sinking slightly, demanding immense effort. Every step was a battle against his own biology. His lungs burned, and a familiar tight ache began to radiate across his chest. "Not now, old fool," he silently commanded his rebellious heart. "Not until Leo." He reached the perimeter wall, a 6-foot structure topped with a decorative but effective wrought iron fence. This was the point where his architect's mind truly paid dividends. He hadn't planned to scale the wall. That was suicide. Instead, he remembered the drainage plans. 15 feet to the left of the main gate, where the landscaping met the service road, there was a large storm drain, installed during the home's renovation 5 years ago. Elias had argued vehemently against the placement, stating it compromised the foundation's integrity, but the board had overridden him for cost savings. The drain cover was massive, but the bolts were old and rusted. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the searing pain. Using the wire tool he had hidden, he worked with a focused intensity, leveraging the wire under the edge of the heavy cast iron. He was not strong, but he was patient. He worked the edge, pulling, twisting, using the leverage of the wall itself. Sweat mingled with the cold moisture on his brow. The metal grated, a sound like a distant, angry whisper. Finally, with a tremendous, shuddering heave that threatened to tear the muscles in his back, the cover shifted just enough, perhaps 8 inches of muddy, dark opening. Enough for a determined, desperate old man to squeeze through. He pushed the walker away, a gesture of finality, and slid into the gap. The smell was instantly overwhelming. Wet earth, stagnant water, and the metallic tang of urban runoff. He dropped into the shallow, icy water of the culvert. It was a narrow, claustrophobic space, forcing him to crawl forward on his hands and knees, the chill penetrating his clothes instantly. The crawl lasted perhaps 10 minutes, but in the darkness, the time expanded into an eternity of grinding discomfort. He emerged onto a dark, rarely used access road half a mile from the nursing home, covered in mud and shivering violently. He was free, but now the real journey began. He had no money, save for a few crumpled dollar bills he'd kept hidden for emergencies, not nearly enough for the journey across the city. His destination, the Iron District, lay on the far western edge, a place of abandoned factories and desperate housing, miles away from the quiet affluence of Golden Sunset. He walked, or rather, he lurched. The cold was his first enemy, threatening hypothermia. The second was his failing body. Every step was a conscious negotiation between his will and his physical limits. He reached a main thoroughfare, just as the first city bus of the early morning rumbled past, a number 47, heading toward the industrial core. He flagged it down with a desperate wave, staggering onto the steps. The driver, a tired woman with eyes that had seen too much urban misery, simply stared at his mud-caked state. "The Iron District, all the way," Elias rasped, pulling out the few dollars. The driver sighed, looking at the paltry amount. "That'll get you halfway, Grandpa. You got change?" Elias shook his head, shame burning hotter than the cold. He was about to be put off the bus when a young man in the back, hunched over a laptop, spoke up. "I got him, driver. Take him where he needs to go." Elias nodded his thanks, too exhausted to speak, and collapsed into a seat near the rear. As the bus began its long, weaving route through the city, Elias allowed his mind to drift, needing the distraction from the pain. He thought of Leo. The great tragedy of their relationship had been a matter of perspective. Elias had wanted Leo to follow in his footsteps, to inherit the firm, the prestige, the wealth. Leo, however, saw the firm as a hollow monument to Elias's emotional absenteeism. The final irreparable fight had been over an architectural project, a massive, soulless corporate tower Elias designed, which Leo argued was an environmental disaster and a blight on the skyline. Leo left, choosing a life of idealistic poverty over tainted wealth. Elias, in his stubborn pride, cut him off entirely, a decision that had haunted every quiet moment since. Now, Elias was undertaking this desperate, reckless act, not merely to apologize, but because he carried the knowledge of something that could change everything, something he had hidden away, a secret so profound it transcended mere monetary value. The bus ride lasted nearly 2 hours. As the sun began its weak ascent, painting the sky in sickly hues of gray and orange, the landscape outside the window transformed. The clean, predictable streets gave way to cracked pavement, boarded-up storefronts, and the towering skeletons of abandoned factories. The air grew heavy with the smell of old oil and rust. This was the Iron District. He disembarked, feeling the jarring cold reality of the neighborhood. The buildings here seemed to sag under the weight of their own neglect. Elias pulled out the laundry ticket map. Leo's last known address, according to the fragments of Nurse Mildred's call, was a squat, disused warehouse complex known locally as the Stack. The search was agonizing. He moved slowly through the narrow, garbage-strewn alleys, calling Leo's name, his voice thin and reedy against the vast silence of the industrial ruins. His legs felt like lead weights. The pain in his chest was now a constant, dull throb. He knew he was running out of time, perhaps hours before the staff at Golden Sunset realized their prize prisoner was gone and the citywide search began. He found the Stack, a derelict brick building, its windows shattered like broken teeth. He saw a faint plume of smoke rising from a makeshift chimney on the roof, a sign of habitation. He entered the cavernous, freezing interior. The air was thick with dampness and the smell of cheap kerosene. In the center of the vast floor, huddled beneath a collection of salvaged tarpaulins and old insulation foam, was a figure. Thin, bearded, and defeated. "Leo?" Elias whispered. The figure stirred violently, scrambling up. It was Leo. but not the vibrant, smiling young man Elias remembered. This Leo was gaunt, his eyes hollowed by exhaustion and hunger. His clothes were threadbare, dusted with grime. Leo stared at the old man, who was covered in mud and shaking uncontrollably. His initial shock turned instantly to cold, furious resentment. "What in God's name are you doing here?" Leo's voice was rough, unused. I heard," Elias stammered, trying to regulate his breathing. "I heard you were struggling, that you were here." "And you escaped your gilded cage to come slumming?" Leo's lip curled in bitter contempt. "Did you come to see the failure your refusal to help created? Did you come to preach about the importance of a good career path?" "No, Leo. I came to apologize, and to give you what I should have given you decades ago." Leo laughed, a hollow, painful sound. "An apology? You risked freezing to death for an apology? Save your breath, grandfather. I don't need your pity, and I certainly don't need your money. I chose this. I chose integrity over your tainted empire." Elias stepped closer, forcing his exhausted body to stand tall. "This isn't about pity. It's about atonement. I know you chose integrity, and that is why I came. Because you were right, Leo. You were always right about the cost of my ambition, and the cost of that ambition is precisely where your salvation lies." He reached inside his coat, pulling out the single most crucial item he had risked everything for, a small leather-bound journal, brittle with age and water damage, bearing the embossed initials E.T. "This is not money, Leo. This is much, much more. It is my confession, my legacy, and your future. It is the secret I carried for 50 years. Leo looked at the journal, skepticism etched into every line of his face. "What is this? Old blueprints?" "No, it is the key to the greatest mistake and the greatest triumph of my career. Do you remember the Metropolitan Bank Tower? The one I designed, the one you hated, the one that cemented my reputation?" Leo nodded curtly. "In 1975, when the cornerstone was laid, I was at the height of my hubris. I believed my work was eternal. But I also knew, deep down, that the pursuit of corporate glory had destroyed the true artistic soul of my craft. I had become a glorified accountant of steel." Elias paused, leaning heavily against a rusted pillar, the cold radiating through his thin coat. He needed every ounce of strength to finish the story. "I had a secret passion, Leo, not for skyscrapers, but for history. Specifically, the lost history of this city. Artifacts, original documents, maps, and blueprints detailing the city's birth. Things that historians believed were destroyed in the Great Fire of 17. I spent 10 years collecting them, pouring my soul into preserving them, documenting their provenance, but I was afraid to reveal them, afraid they would overshadow my professional life, afraid of ridicule." "What does this have to do with the bank tower?" Leo demanded, his interest finally piqued by the sheer strangeness of the confession. Elias smiled faintly, a shadow of his old, brilliant self. "I couldn't trust banks. I couldn't trust museums. I certainly couldn't trust myself. So I built the perfect vault. When the cornerstone of the Metropolitan Bank was laid, I ensured that the copper time capsule placed inside was a decoy. The real treasure, the entire collection, valued today at potentially hundreds of millions, a trove of irreplaceable historical significance, is hidden inside the dummy cornerstone." Leo stared, speechless. The idea was so audacious, so theatrical. It was exactly the kind of move a man like Elias would make, a grand gesture hidden in plain sight. "The dummy cornerstone," Elias continued, his voice weakening, "is not at the bank. It was rejected for being structurally unsound, a deliberate flaw I engineered. It was taken to the municipal storage depot, the one that was condemned and sold off 40 years ago. It's listed simply as Architectural Salvage, Lot 44. And the depot it is right here, Leo. It's this very warehouse complex. Elias opened the journal. Inside, meticulously drawn in fading ink, were the precise coordinates and a series of complex architectural notations, a secret language only he and Leo, who had studied architecture briefly, could fully decipher. The collection is worth a fortune, yes, but more importantly, it is a priceless historical legacy. It's the kind of discovery that changes history books. And it needs someone with integrity, someone who understands its true value to reveal it. Not a greedy old man, but you, Leo. You hid the most important historical collection in the city's history inside a wall and then kept the secret for 50 years? Leo murmured, running his hand over the cracked leather of the journal. I hid it because I was a coward. I hid it because I wanted my name on the building, not on the footnotes of history. But now, it's yours. Use it to do what you always wanted to do, to build something real, something meaningful, not just for yourself, but for the community you care about. Leo looked down at the journal, then back up at his grandfather, seeing not the domineering patriarch, but a broken, freezing old man who had risked everything, including his life, for one final act of redemption. The resentment, so carefully cultivated over years, began to crumble. But why now? Why escape the nursing home just to tell me this? Elias attempted a shrug, which turned into a painful shudder. Because I knew if I told them at Golden Sunset, they would seize the journal, declare me incompetent, and the secret would be lost to corporate vultures. I had to deliver it personally. I had to see you one last time, Leo. A sudden, sharp pain seized Elias's chest, far worse than anything he had felt on the journey. He gasped, clutching the pillar, his eyes wide with a sudden, devastating clarity. He was fading. The coordinates, Elias choked out, pushing the journal into Leo's hands. They lead to the sub-basement, beneath the old boiler room. Lot 44. You have to be careful. It's unstable. Leo rushed forward, catching his grandfather as he stumbled. Grandfather, we need a doctor, now. No time, Elias whispered, a thin trickle of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. The ending, Leo, it's priceless because it gives you back your integrity. Don't sell it to the first bidder. Use it to build the world you always wanted. The sound of sirens, faint but unmistakable, began to cut through the morning air. They had found him. Security Chief Jensen, relentless and methodical, had tracked the missing bus fare and the abandoned walker. They're coming, Leo said, panic rising in his voice. Let them, Elias said, his voice barely audible. He looked at Leo, seeing the spark of the boy he loved, now rekindled by purpose. You have the map. You have the secret. Go, Leo. Leo hesitated, torn between the need to save his grandfather and the urgency of the moment. He looked down at the journal, the weight of a lifetime of secrets now resting in his hands. He knew, instinctively, that Elias had made this final heroic journey not to be saved, but to save Leo. I will find it, grandfather, Leo vowed, tears finally streaming down his grimy face. And I'll make sure your name is remembered for the right reasons this time. Elias Thorne smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that erased years of bitterness. It was the last thing Leo saw before the warehouse door burst open, flooding the space with the blinding flashlights of the security detail and the blue light of the approaching police cars. Security Chief Jensen, winded and furious, stood framed in the doorway, spotting the old man collapsed against the pillar. Thorne, you are in violation of contract, and you are under arrest, Jensen yelled, rushing forward. Leo, gripping the journal tightly, slipped into the shadows behind the towering bulk of an old industrial press. He watched as the paramedics surrounded Elias, their movements frantic, their voices muffled. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that Elias Thorne had finally found his escape, not through the door, but through the profound final piece of a mission completed. Leo waited, hidden, until the commotion subsided and the authorities had removed the frail body and begun their tedious search of the premises. He waited until the silence of the Iron District returned, heavy and absolute. Then, guided by the intricate maps in the journal, he began his own descent. He found the sub-basement, exactly where Elias had detailed. The air was colder, denser, smelling of coal dust and ancient stone. And there it was, beneath the rusting bulk of the defunct boiler, a massive, irregularly shaped block of granite, clearly labeled Architectural Salvage, Lot 44. It took him hours of agonizing work, using tools he salvaged from the surrounding ruins to chip away at the mortar. When the granite finally broke open, revealing a sealed, copper-lined cavity within, Leo's breath hitched. Inside, resting on velvet cloth, were stacks of parchment, bound volumes, and delicate rolled-up maps. The light from his phone illuminated the fragile ink, the original city charter, signed by the founders, the lost blueprints for the first bridge across the river, and a detailed hand-drawn map of the city's underground waterways. It was history, tangible and breathtaking. It was the legacy of a city, and now it was his. Leo did not sell the collection. He honored Elias's final wish. He established the Thorne Foundation for Urban History and Conservation, using the collection as its cornerstone. The sheer historical value and the dramatic, redemptive story behind its discovery, the old man escaping the nursing home, the hidden vault, the final act of love, captured the world's imagination. Donations poured in. Leo, the idealist, finally had the resources to build the community he had always dreamed of, starting with the revitalization of the very Iron District where his grandfather had found his final rest. The ending, as Elias had promised, was priceless. It was not the millions of dollars the collection was worth, nor the fame that now surrounded Leo. It was the quiet, profound dignity of redemption. Elias Thorne, the architect of regret, had finally designed something pure, something lasting, something built entirely on the strength of his love for his grandson. And for the first time in his life, Leo Thorne was truly rich. Rich in purpose, rich in history, and rich in the knowledge that his grandfather, in his final, desperate hour, had finally chosen him over his own pride. The greatest treasure Elias ever built was the bridge he finally crossed to reach his grandson. A bridge built not of steel, but of a desperate, final, unforgettable sacrifice.